Welcome to the France 24 debate. The bells have quite literally been ringing across Europe in support of Ukraine. From Paris and the still not reconstructed Notre Dame. Let's listen. To Berlin's Remembrance Church. And in Madrid, a crowd gathering outside the city's La Almudena Cathedral. This sound part of a pan-European show of support, sympathy and a call for peace. We're asking in this debate this question: is Europe doing its best for Ukraine? Emmanuel Macron, speaking as President of the European Union and as President of France, of course, spoke of standing resolutely with his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky and the Ukrainian people in the face of the now week-old Russian invasion. It's now been confirmed that the number of people fleeing Ukraine has topped 1 million, creating a mini migrant-style crisis playing out on the border with Poland. There are moving scenes playing out there, families saying farewell, the women and children leave, the men wave as they return to join the national mobilization against Vladimir Putin's forces. France has opened its heart to these refugees, it's fair to say. Their plight has united public opinion more than it ever was during the, say, Syrian migrant crisis. But looking at the damage done to places like Kharkiv, one can't help but ask, is this enough? This moral and material support, as well as military hardware for Ukraine's army. Only today, the EU announcing a further 300 million euros in funds without any conditions to be given to Ukraine. Is money enough? Before we meet our panel of guests, let's hear what President Macron said in his speech from the Élysée.
Les jours qui viennent seront vraisemblablement de plus en plus durs. Des centaines de milliers de réfugiés fuient vers la Moldavie, la Pologne, la Roumanie, la Hongrie, la Slovaquie et progressivement le reste de l'Europe. Dans cette épreuve sans précédent, depuis nombre de décennies, nous nous tenons aux côtés de l'Ukraine. Je salue ce soir le courage du peuple ukrainien qui résiste sous le feu des armes. Et en votre nom, j'adresse au président Volodymyr Zelensky le soutien fraternel de la France.
That was just about 24 hours ago. Since then, Jean-Yves Le Drian, the foreign minister, adding a chilling postscript to that. He told French media this morning, what if the worst was still in front of us? Kiev, of course, still under threat from that massive Russian military convoy. The invasion continues to take casualties all over Ukraine. Our guests for this debate here in the studio, Yves Bertoncini, expert and consultant on European affairs, president of the Mouvement Européen France. Thank you, sir, for being with us. On the other side of the studio here, we have Elena Volochin, France 24's correspondent in Moscow. Elena has great experience of the Russian scene, and of course, you've charted the conflict with Ukraine from its very beginning back in 2014, the annexation of Crimea, and obviously Elena's observations really important to this debate. Thank you for being with us, Elena. Great to see you as well.
Good evening.
Joining us by Skype from Baia Mare in Romania, Oksana Potapova. Oksana is a women's rights and peace-building activist, a feminist researcher and community theatre practitioner. Importantly, Oksana left Ukraine just a couple of days ago, so Oksana now a refugee. And thank you, Oksana, for being with us. We look forward to hearing what you've got to say. Joining us by satellite from Brussels, Sandro Gozzi, LREM Renaissance MEP. Sandro, thank you very much for being with us. I'll get this one out of the way with you, Yves, if that's okay. Is Europe doing enough? Can Europe ever do enough on this one?
Well, Europe is doing its best, even if I'm afraid it could not be enough. But let me insist on the positive aspect. The Europeans at large, they have reacted since they have the feeling that, of course, there is a Russian aggression against the Ukrainians, and also that, well, the Ukrainians are part of Europe, are part of the family, and so we should help them. So there have been a civil reaction first, and then political reaction at the highest level, which are positive. So you know what they are: humanitarian aid, welcoming the refugees. It was not a given. Military assistance. This is the first time, for example, for some countries and for the EU at large. Political dialogue. Economic and financial sanctions against the aggressor, against Russia. So I think this is all positive, and now we are in a race against time with the hope that all this could, together with the heroic resistance of the Ukrainians on the ground, could block Russia or could inhibit Russia from invading the whole Ukraine, and maybe could be an incentive to have a kind of discussions and peaceful settlements. Well, but having said this, of course, the only limitation is that Europe is not sending troops, is not striking, precisely because Ukraine is not part of the EU or of NATO. And we need then to state that on the ground, the balance of forces is not equal at all. It's a bit David against Goliath. So we're helping David a lot, but Goliath is stronger, I'm afraid. So I hope there will be a political settlement, because if it's only at the military level, we are facing very dark times.
Yves, thank you very much indeed. Let's get a response from Oksana, who is Ukrainian. She left Kiev just a few days ago. And we first met Oksana. Let's just sort of contextualize this for everybody. We first spoke to Oksana last week when she joined us from the metro station in Kiev, where she was actually sheltering from a possible attack. This was how she appeared when she spoke to me last Thursday to talk about how people were sheltering in the metro station there in Kiev, hoping that, basically bombs wouldn't land on them. She showed us how people were hunkered down for the night, using trains to sleep in and basically sleeping on platforms, people worried about what's going to happen next, and gave us this really chilling testimony of what was going on there in her hometown. Oksana has escaped from Ukraine, fled now, and is safe in Romania, joining us from there now live. Oksana, Volodymyr Zelensky is calling for a no-fly zone. Clearly, he's calling for more help from Europe. I'm wondering, from your perspective, how you see this now. What is your feeling about what Europe is doing?
Thank you. My perspective is informed very much by my experience and by the fact that even though I am personally already in safety, my family is scattered all across Ukraine. I come from southeast of Ukraine, from Donbass, where actually this conflict started 8 years ago. And my parents and my grandmother still live 50 kilometers from the borders with the so-called republics. And the risk of that is because of Putin's recognition of these republics. They now have sort of a legal permission for themselves to expand warfare into the rest of the territories of these regions, as is inscribed in these so-called constitutions. So the risk of heightened fights in that region are very strong. And my parents don't feel like they could go anywhere that is safe. And my sister, on the other hand, is in Kiev, unable to leave for a week already. And understanding this, I'm connected to a lot of people and a lot of stories on the ground where the fire is ongoing. And what you see at the border in terms of refugee crisis is just a small number of people who are actually the most lucky, I wouldn't say lucky, but privileged, or who have had the resources to escape. And I think what isn't being done enough is to do everything that is possible to stop the fire, whether it's closing the sky, whether it's demanding ceasefire, whether it's using all international security infrastructure organizations such as the OSCE, the UN, and others to demand for humanitarian corridors, for evacuation of civilians. It's been a week for people living inside the cities. Food and medication are scarce. There is no way to deliver that. So we're facing a crisis on many levels. It's both a migration crisis, it's also a humanitarian crisis, and it's a crisis of global security infrastructure. And as much as I agree that a lot of the responses from the European Union have been positive and supportive, I think there is still a lot to be done, because we are talking about a complete reorganization of the world peace infrastructure. We cannot go back to things the way they were before, and people's lives are still at stake in this.
Oksana, thank you for now. We'll come back to you, of course, for more throughout this debate, because your viewpoint pertinent on so many levels. Sandra, I'm coming to you very shortly. First, I want to hear from Elena Volochin here in the studio. Elena, of course, has covered the whole conflict dating back to its well, you could call it its origins of 2014, but I think, Elena, it's possibly fair to say it goes back even further, doesn't it, in terms of what's happening in Vladimir Putin's assessment of things. And it's interesting to hear Oksana talking there and how that contrasts with what Vladimir Putin's been saying. It's a real difference, isn't it, of conception about what's going on.
Yes, of course. Vladimir Putin is written a parallel story, an opposite story of what that's happening, and he's always accusing the Ukrainians of doing what he does himself. It's like he said just in his last speech at the Security Council that Ukrainians are fooled by neo-Nazi propaganda, they use foreign mercenaries, they use human shells, they place artillery in the inhabited areas and near kindergartens. I remember when I was in Luhansk in 2014, I was on the so-called separatist positions when everybody knows that the separatists were in fact like a Russian project. But at this time you couldn't say that. You were always talking from the Russian position, and officially the Russian position was that it was a separatist rebellion. So at this time, the separatists, they were also placing artillery, and I remember very well this kindergarten in Lugansk where you would have a separatist military unit and artillery placed just right near this kindergarten, with in fact was shelled by Ukrainians just because they were targeting the positions of the artillery. So Vladimir Putin, he always accuses Ukrainians of using the very methods that he uses. It's like these stories with saboteurs. For years he has been saying, until just recently, to justify Russian intervention, he was saying that some Ukrainian saboteurs entered the Russian territory from the territories of the separatist republics of Donetsk and Luhansk, where in fact just by looking at the map, you would understand that this is virtually impossible. So yes, of course, what he's saying is very different from what Oksana has saw, because in his own country, within the borders of Russia, he's just writing an opposite story of what's happening for his own Russian people.
Inventing his own sense of what history and what reality is about, a parallel universe, one might say. Elena Volochin, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in Sandro Gozzi. Sandro, you're an MEP. I'm not holding you responsible for Europe's policy, of course, but obviously you have an insight. And I'm wondering whether, how we begin to really sort of take apart this whole conflict and do the right things. It's governed by so many different international laws and conventions. But obviously, do you think there's more that Europe can do? Is Europe doing enough? Do you feel Europe's doing enough?
Europe is doing a lot. Europe is doing something which has never done. It is certainly not the time to blame Europe for the brave and courageous decision the European Union is taking. Strong political support, full engagement of Europe, and notably through the personality of Emmanuel Macron, in always keeping the possibility, the hope, to come back to talks, to come back to diplomacy, as Macron did again today, talking to President Putin. A strong macro-financial assistance to Ukraine, over 1,200,000 euro. Strong humanitarian support, and using the EU budget to provide military support, on top of unprecedented economic sanctions. Is it needed? If it is necessary to do more, Europe will do more. And today, Europe has taken already a very important decision also for the people who you are invited in your program tonight. Because finally, Europe today has decided to provide temporary protection to all the refugees, Ukrainian and non-Ukrainian resident in Ukraine, who are fleeing the war. And this is something that it has never happened. This is exactly something which was refused to Italy in 2015. And I'm not complaining about that. I'm very happy, as a member of the European Parliament, Italian elected in France, that my European Union, our European Union, is providing to Poland and Hungary the solidarity that Hungary and Poland had refused to Italy in 2015. So Europe is doing a lot. It is clear that this is something which has never happened since the Second World War. And it is something which requires strong attention, minute by minute attention, and to see, according to the events and according to the decision and according to the developments on the ground, is certainly we have to see whether something more will be needed. But I think that, we are seeing something which has never happened before in terms of unity and in terms of commitment from the European Union. Then it is clear that Putin has destroyed all the confidence-building measures, fundamental principles, international law principles, agreement around which we had built up the European security in the continent since the Second World War. And it is true that, today we are talking, of course, about the urgency, about the war, about the conflict, but that we already, as it has been said before, we already think that tomorrow cannot be the world of yesterday, and we have also to think how to reorganize the stability and the security in our continent.
Indeed, it's fair to say that things won't be the same afterwards. And Sandra, I don't think anybody's disagreeing with anything you're saying there. Thank you very much indeed. We'll come back to you very shortly. Eve, I'd like to put this to you. What Sandra says, I think, is fair enough, given the world we're in, but Volodymyr Zelensky is asking for more. He wants a no-fly zone. I think he'd be very grateful if he got troops. I think he'd like some sort of assistance along those lines. Joe Biden, of course, has said, no way, NATO's not going to get involved. NATO, EU, you can probably read them as both the same, can't you?
No, but I agree with Sandro that Europe, and it's the very title of your program, and it's doing its best. But as I've said, maybe it won't be enough. It's really positive that Europe has reacted, and the Europeans at large that far. But then, yes, seen from Ukraine, if we have a look there on the grounds, they would need more, and they would maybe need a military strike, no-fly zone. They would even need. Mr. Zelensky even had it asked for an immediate accession to the EU, which is not possible on the very short run. So on the very short run, Europe has delivered, and it's historic, yes, indeed, if we look at ourselves. But if we look at them, it won't be sufficient. But it's not only about us, by the way. It's also the Occidental, the Western world in general, because, the Americans could make a difference. The Europeans are not that muscled as regards their defense and their military, their armies. The Americans have said since from the start, the beginning, they said, well, we will help you as long as we are not led to intervene militarily. So that's the limit of our action. But having said this, again, this is combined with the heroic resistance of the Ukrainians themselves. We help them, but they are on the ground. They are reacting, probably much more than Vladimir Putin had expected. So if you combine their resistance on the ground around many towns, the soldiers, but also civilians, if you combine with the support of the Europeans to Ukraine, but also to the sanctions taken against Russia, and in Russia there is probably a debate. There are debates in Russia in the circles at the highest level around Vladimir Putin. The combination of all this could maybe lead Russia to not to stop completely, but maybe to try and find a landing zone, which could be, let's say, kind of Georgian-style landing zone. It's ugly, the Georgian status, but Georgia is still free. So that would be, let's say, the second best the Europeans could obtain and the Western world, but even more importantly, the Ukrainians may obtain, as long as we don't send troops, which we won't do.
Okay, quick timeline. Georgia 2008, that was the invasion. Then Putin sending in troops to, he said, help Abkhazia and South Ossetia. That was his excuse for going into Georgia at that time. Sorry, Elena, you were going to say something.
Yes, may I react to this, Mark? Because yes, you never saw West and Europe that united against Russian aggression. That's a fact. But if I may, Europe, to me, is reacting way too late. When you heard the Putin speech from, I think, the 22nd of February, 3 or 4 days before the invasion, in fact, where it was completely clear that he would be attacking Ukraine because he was presenting a great project of the Russian Empire, and he threatened Ukraine by saying, we will show you what decommunization looks like. It was absolutely clear, and Americans have been saying for weeks that Putin is going to attack Ukraine. And the next day of this speech, you would have a meeting at Brussels discussing sanctions. It's been 7 years and a half that this war is going on. But as it wasn't touching touching Europe and the very interests of Europe, no one was really reacting. Who would talk about Russian aggression for this 7 years and a half? Who would really take measures? Who would really adopt strong sanctions, strong enough to really target and have consequences on Russian economy? This was a war for 7 years and a half in eastern Ukraine. This was a war, but it was so local that, yes, you would have condemns, you would have sanctions, you would have all this, but the unified Western world that we see today trying really to contain Putin and to stop this aggression, we are always reacting 40 hours too late. He already took the decision. He already launched his attack. So now we are thinking, what do we do with that? And the very question is, without a military action that I agree with Yves is likely not going to happen. I mean, there was jokes about these 5,000 helmets which were delivered from Germany to Ukraine above the aggression. Now, if there is no military response from the West, which is really a question because Putin has his finger on the nuclear button as well. So, of course, it's difficult now, but we should have, in order not to be in this situation today where we don't know what to do with the Russian aggression, you would need to take measures and to think of it. You had 7 years and a half to react to this and to think about this.
So this has all been going on, as you quite correctly point out, since at least 2014. There have been the signs that have been there. Oksana, can I bring you back in? Oksana, the Ukrainian refugee. You're so much more than that, I know, but for this exercise, that's how we describe you. Oksana Potapova, a women's rights, peace-building activist, feminist researcher, community theatre practitioner, but refugee from Ukraine. When did you in Kiev know that this was going to happen? Did you have that kind of sense that this invasion was coming before it happened?
I want to start with something else, and I will answer your question.
Go ahead.
What has been interesting for me is that I was in Kiev since mid of January. I had actually just come back from a year abroad. I was completing a master's program in the UK, and my visa had just expired, and I returned and just recently started a job in Ukraine. And of course, we were flooded with media, with claims by President Biden and different sources, giving us dates of invasion. And Ukrainians have an amazing sense of humor. Even now, you will see a lot of memes going around and jokes becoming classic in an instant. And one of the jokes was, whatever people were planning, they would say, let's do it after the 16th, because that was one of the dates when a possible invasion was announced. And we were saying, okay, I have some plans for work. Let's postpone it until the 16th. We will see the invasion happen, and then we'll go on with our lives. Nobody, on the one hand, actually really believed it. But what was interesting for me is that it felt like Ukraine was not the subject of those discussions. Ukraine's voice was very quiet in speculations or forecasts. The negotiations that were happening in the beginning of January in Europe with Russia didn't include Ukraine. And for me, it was, as a feminist activist who is so concerned with issues of agency and voice, I felt that as a whole country, we were losing our voice and the world was deciding our fate. And what I see now is that suddenly we are center stage. You are rightly pointed out that it is Ukrainian people who are fighting, who are resisting. It is, our civilians who are dying. It is our untrained young men who are going to self-organized battalions to guard the cities. And of course, Ukraine has gained agency like unprecedented agency in the world. I think what is important is whenever this is over, and I hope that it will be over very soon, that things don't go back to normal. Ukraine must be part of conversations about whatever is the peace agreement. Ukrainian civil society must be part of those conversations. Ukraine must be part of political decisions in Europe. I'm not an expert enough to comment on EU accession, even though I know that on the ground, of course, everyone supports it and sees this as a real chance. But I think whatever way our relationship with Europe would be, we cannot have a backseat anymore. And we cannot give up the agency that we have gained politically, as a culturally, militarily, and in all these ways. And for me, this is an important message, that we cannot just wait around for somebody to announce to us when they think we will be invaded or not. We want to be there as a country to say, we want this to stop today, and our voice matters. And we want the world to listen and to do things on our terms as well, because we are paying the price for it. I don't know what it means in terms of restructuring the political games or the political processes, but now is the time. And I genuinely believe it.
Oksana, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Sandro Gozzi in Brussels, the LREM Renaissance MEP. Sandro, did Europe almost sleepwalk into this crisis?
Listen, Europe was nowhere last few months ago. A few months ago, there were a meeting in Europe, in a country which doesn't belong to the European Union, which is called Switzerland. And in this meeting, there were two presidents. None of them is European. There was Joe Biden and there was Vladimir Putin. It is under the push of Emmanuel Macron and under the sense of urgency and of unity that this time the European leaders and institutions displayed, that now the European Union is playing a role. This is why, I mean, I understand all the arguments about European Union 10 years ago, 8 years ago, 1 year ago. But that was a totally different context. And this is why I don't buy the argument Europe should have done more, or Europe wasn't there because Europe didn't conceive itself as a truly powerful actor, as a truly diplomatic actor. It is now that this awareness is raising. Many of us has been calling upon Europe to play this role many years ago. We were very few to talk about power for Europe and Europe puissante. We were very few to support Emmanuel Macron when he was saying we have to build up a sovereign Europe, which is also a Europe capable of being an actor in the crisis. We, on one side, we must do everything we can to fully support the Ukrainian resistance. And this is why the military assistance, the economic assistance is so important, because they are fighting for us. They are dying for us. They are fighting for our values. And this is why it is clear that Ukraine belongs to Europe. It is clear that the place of Ukrainian people, if they decided to do so, it is at the heart of Europe, at the heart of the European Union. But I mean, we don't have to look at the current situation and the possible future development looking with a mirror in the past. Because in the past, Europe wasn't there, because they were divided. This is why I recalled you the division in 2015, not because, I fully support the decision that we took today about refugees, which is part of the issue, which is part of the assistance that we have to give to the Ukrainian people. But I recall you this because in 2015, we were in the midst of another geopolitical crisis, coming from Libya, coming from the Horn of Africa, and Europe wasn't there. There were not awareness. And it is on this that we have built up. And what we have to do, it is clear that we must ready to increase the sanctions. Listen, Putin today closed down, he had closed the radio, now today he has closed the only independent TV. In Russia. Why? Because he's losing the battle of the public opinion in Russia. Because he's trying to brainwash the Russian people. But the Russians are starting to be aware that this war is wrong for them. That there are a Nazi in Ukraine. That it is a Nazi way of entering things, the one of Putin. So, I mean, we have to continue to do, on one side, providing strong assistance to the Ukrainian. I don't think that Zelensky is out of the game. I think that Zelensky is fully in the game now. Emmanuel Macron has always talked to Vladimir Putin and to Zelensky. And also the strong symbolic message that we gave from here, from Brussels, from the European Parliament, 2 days ago with the speech of Zelensky. I see that these are all symbols that we are finally aware and ready to play our role. Then what is the most important thing that it was said also today from the Elysee? That, I mean, we are always ready to favor talks. There is always time to cease the fire. There is always time to stop the conflict and come back to the negotiation.
Sandra, I'll stop you there. Sandra, I'll stop you there. Thank you very much indeed, because I think we're getting the point there that obviously Europe's role has changed and Europe's awareness has changed. And I think many people maybe in Ukraine might be asking, they still want some more. And we hear what you're saying. Eve, you had a reflection.
Well, it's also Russia which has changed. I mean, back in 2008, there was an aggression in Georgia, a reaction from Europe and from Nicolas Sarkozy, by the way, at that time. And Putin stopped. And then, of course, he took the control of two to three territories. You know, Ossetia and Abkhazia are still under Russian control, but he did not go to Tbilisi. And after the annexation of Crimea, which was a partial portion of Ukraine, it's true that we reacted. We will never admit this, but we went to play football, you know, in Moscow, and we won the World Cup, by the way. It was business as usual. This time is different, because this time it's in our direction. Ukraine, it's much bigger. It's much more an aggressive stance from Russia. And in fact, we are instinctively showing solidarity, but it's also because we believe we are the next, actually. There is this risk we did not feel when Georgia was under attack. I even don't mention Transnistria, because many Europeans even don't know that there are Russian troops in Moldova for years. We never heard of this. So now we are also fighting for ourselves, as Sandro has said. But let me add just one thing. There's a crucial point there, because when Russia is that aggressive, many Europeans believe that the only reliable partner against Russia is America, which, given the balance of forces as of today, it's particularly true. The problem first is that the Americans don't want to commit for Ukraine. So will they commit for us? Yes, normally yes, because there is NATO, the European Union. But what I believe is very crucial now, seen from Europe and France in particular, is then, yes, of course, to reinforce the European pillar of the Atlantic Alliance, to work together with the Americans, because we still need them. We still need them. But what we understood now, and Sandro has rightly pointed that out, is that it's more than a wake-up call. We must do more. And I want to really to pay tribute to what Olaf Scholz has said in the Bundestag last week, because this is an historical address, Olaf Scholz, the move from Olaf Scholz. You know, I've met an Irish minister today in Paris. They were neutral, and they accepted to let the European Union finance the sending weapons to. So there are moves, there are shifts, but to combine them positively, beyond Ukraine, I would say. I hope it will be enough for Ukraine. I'm afraid not. But on the medium run, we really need to reconsider the broad picture together with our American allies, because they are still key for us, even if in the long run, we should take our destiny into our own hands.
Indeed. I wonder whether the way that the US pulled out of Afghanistan emboldened Vladimir Putin in some way to act as he did now.
Of course, I mean, Biden is, you know, Sleepy Joe, as Trump has said, and probably Putin has got this. And it's true that the Americans, they have, by the way, they were able to strike in many conflicts. But now there's a fatigue. Plus, it was not that efficient. So probably Putin has used this momentum, because he was also stronger, because he believed that we were weak. Actually, we are not that weak, and that's the positive things. We are showing that we are not that weak, and the Ukrainians are very, very strong. Again, my admiration to them, and I hope it will be enough.
Indeed. As we say, civilians in many cases standing in front of Russian military hardware, stopping it in the streets. I mean, you've got to have some real courage to do that, and hats off to the Ukrainian people for doing that. Elena, can I come back to you? Think about when Crimea was annexed, when Crimea was taken, that land grab. Would it be correct to say that Europe kind of didn't act then? There wasn't enough done. There was a sense of, well, it doesn't really concern us. Let's just let it happen. Vladimir's doing what he wants to do. Let's just let it happen. Is that a sense of what you got at the time?
I join Mr. Godi when he said that, yes, Europe was out of the game and it was not up to Europe to be in or out, because in Vladimir Putin's vision, it's Russia against America. He has a very bipolar vision of the world. And so the confrontation from the beginning, and from also this story with annexation of Crimea, was indeed the confrontation between the two blocks, the two historical blocks. And of course, now, the thing is that now I'm not still sure that Europe is really in the game as much as it should be, because beyond the war between Russia and Ukraine, it's the war between Russia and NATO. Let's not forget why this started and how it started, the military buildup against the Ukrainian borders. The aim from Vladimir Putin was to have Joe Biden to consider, and NATO to consider its claims, who are still the same, and he doesn't move from that, is the withdrawal of all the NATO troops from the 13 countries that integrated NATO after 1997, and the withdrawal of all the missiles that are in Europe, and also the non-integration of further countries within NATO. And I think now it's still the aim of Vladimir Putin, and he wants to be talking with the Americans, and he wants to be talking with NATO. So in his game, Europe is still not part of the story, not part of the conflict. So whatever Europeans could do, indeed now they are acting, they are uniting with the West, with NATO, with the Americans. But still, I think in Vladimir Putin's vision, this would have absolutely no consequences. He already said that the sanctions, he doesn't fear that. I think he pretty well knew what the sanctions would be, that it would be unprecedented. He didn't expect such a united, strong reaction from the West. I think he would have thought that he could go on with the negotiations after he launched the attack. But now, I think, yes, the Europeans, they are doing their best, indeed. We're not talking about military confrontation, but still, I think Vladimir Putin wants to be talking to the United States and wants to be talking to NATO.
Okay, so that's the situation. On the ground in Ukraine, there are people dying. The UN saying 227 civilians have been killed. That is below the estimate that was already put out on Sunday by Ukraine's health ministry. The figures are expected to be far higher than this rounded down figure from the United Nations. Basically, there are losses on both sides. People are losing their lives. Oksana Potapova, can I come back to you? To try and ask what you would hope for going forward. I mean, clearly you want peace. Clearly you want some kind of change in Ukraine's status within the world and some kind of resolution as to why this has happened.
Well, I did not expect this question, even though I think about this all the time. I think we, as Ukraine, as Europe, as the world, we must dream bravely right now. It was mentioned several times that the rules of the games that have been set before are no longer working. And my dream is, can we rewrite these rules together, where the countries that are most affected, like Ukraine, the countries of former Soviet Union that are also still suffering from Russia's imperialist claims, are part of that conversation as well, where Europe's security includes, Georgia, includes Caucasus, includes Central Asia, includes Moldova and others, and where this process is redefining the rules of the game. That is kind of the bigger political dream for me, which I have no clear, understanding of what it might look like.
Oksana,
But,
we need to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, though, for giving us your thoughts. We've really appreciated to have your insight on the situation. Oksana Potapova, refugee from Ukraine, women's rights and peacebuilding activist, and many other things as well, but presently a refugee in Romania. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks to Sandra Gozzi, the MEP from the LREM Renaissance, joining us from Brussels. Thanks to our two guests here in the studio, Elena Volochin, our correspondent in Moscow. Thank you. And Yves Bertoncini, expert on European affairs, as we've heard, president of the Mouvement Européen France. Thank you so very much for joining us. And thanks to you for watching too. Stay with us. More to come, of course. Everything for Ukraine here on France 24.